Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get going. I just was wondering if I could maybe check who's here for Deep Cove and who's here for Edgemont. It's kind of split 50-50, so I
go Deep Cove.
What's that?
Go Deep Cove.
Do Deep Cove first?
Yeah.
That's Gavin Joyce, G@dnv.org if you have concerns about that, but fine by me. Okay, so we're going to go for, so council, we have an agenda that's been circulated. Any errors or omissions? Hearing none. Council Mears, their seconder on the matter, second by Council Pack. In that, we have circulated the minutes from the November 14th meeting of council. Any errors or omissions from those meeting minutes as presented? Hearing none. It's been moved by Council Mears, their seconder on minutes, second by Council Back. Call question, all in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay.
Come in. Come on in.
Come on in.
There's seats right here. Yeah. We'll just have to move whichever stuff is there.
Okay. So the first one on the agenda tonight is Deep Cove, and
It's Councillor Hampson's seat.
and we have Mr. Cohen getting into position for that. I understand that you guys have a 10-15-minute long presentation before we get into council discussion on the matter.
This way.
Thanks, Mayor Little. Good evening, Council. For members of the public, my name is Peter Cohen and I am the Director of Engineering Services. Tonight we have a couple of agenda items for you. The first item relates to our Deep Cove parking review. I'll start with a few brief introductory slides to set the stage, and then I'll pass to Mac Fitzgerald, who's one of our transportation planners here at the district. The second item being presented later on, as time allows, relates to an update on our 30-kilometre-an-hour pilot in Edgemont and our broader considerations of lower speed limits across the district. So presenting that will be Wendelin Jordan, who is our Section Manager of Transportation, joining us virtually, as well as Vanessa Romani, who is one of our transportation engineers as well. Before I jump into our Deep Cove discussion, as the Mayor has alluded to, the initial slides here for Deep Cove are only about 10 to 11 minutes long. And so, Council, I'd really appreciate if we can get through all the content first, and then we can dive into a deep discussion. Now jumping into the Deep Cove parking review. So we know that there are many frustrations within our community as it relates to parking and problematic vehicle circulation in Deep Cove, particularly during winter times. And we have known since our last major parking review, which was a decade ago, that this day would be coming where difficult and broad-ranging decisions may need to be made or considered by council. To clearly frame this evening, I really want council to ensure that you're aware of three fundamental principles as it relates to Deep Cove. Firstly, we continue to try and balance the needs and interests of the three major user groups you see on this slide, namely residents, businesses, and visitors. We know Deep Cove is a highly desirable location to live, work, and play, and we know there are physical limitations in the area. The proposed parking solutions that Mac will walk you through later intends to accommodate the needs of all three groups, but no single group can get everything that they want. The second element is that historically, in dealing with parking concerns, we've effectively looked at specific streets whenever a complaint arises and staff investigate further. In Deep Cove particularly, all this is doing is moving the problem around to the next street, effectively creating a neighbour versus neighbour or street by street situation. If we want to seriously see a change, then our typical way of approaching a parking problem will not work from staff's perspective. And so, as we will present this evening, I'd like to emphasise to council that we're presenting a strategic neighbourhood lens that needs to be applied in thinking about parking holistically in Deep Cove, rather than the needs or desires on one specific street. I certainly know that staff and council have and will continue to receive concerns from residents about their specific street. I would just encourage council to remind yourselves that anything we tweak on one particular road is just going to flow into a problem into the adjacent street. And thirdly, what we present to you this evening won't be the magic answer to solve all of the transportation problems we face in Deep Cove. It's intended instead to be a step in the right direction for something that is both cost effective and can be easily implemented. Council needs to be aware that there are Council needs to be aware that our continued approach to balancing the interests of these three groups that you see on the slides is pushing us towards a point where soon we will no longer be able to engineer our way out of this problem. I know that there are many ideas to possibly solving what's happening in Deep Cove right now, but many of these come at the detriment to one or more of the groups you see on this slide and goes against our fundamental objectives of balancing the needs of all users. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through this slide in detail. Effectively, what it's outlining to you is recapping why we're doing this in the first place. Before we talk about what changes we're proposing, we should also just quickly talk about what we're doing during peak times. As council is aware, during peak periods, we have flaggers out on site to help move traffic. We work with the school district to secure overflow parking lots when school is out of session. And we share messaging to those that are visiting Deep Cove that there's going to be a problem potentially finding a parking spot. Our typical peak period is from May long to September long. This year is a really good example that demand for Deep Cove is increasing and potentially outside of historical norms, particularly during winters and springs like we're experiencing, where folks are enjoying the sunshine and warmer weather instead of putting on their skis and going to the North Shore Mountains or Whistler. Internally, we are reviewing how we can approach this evolving and changing situation and what the long-term implications of a larger peak season in Deep Cove might mean from a financial impact perspective. This is my last slide before handing over to Mac. Effectively, what this is communicating is that the top 5 items in blue are the combination of tools we'll be proposing for Deep Cove in balancing the needs of those 3 groups: residents, businesses, and visitors. They are standard parking restrictions we apply elsewhere in the district and are cost-effective and easy to implement. In other words, if council endorses the staff recommendation this evening, we could install and implement these parking changes in time for the upcoming peak of summer. 2 last things for council to be aware of. Paid parking is we don't plan to be discussing this evening. This is certainly something that we can explore and discuss at a further date. Secondly, technology sometimes gets brought up to be a solution to the current issues. Nothing we present this evening precludes this possibility in the future. However, any new technology we want to be implementing is going to take time and it's going to take money. Our suggestion to council is to consider these parking management tools that we're proposing this evening as an incremental improvement and something we can afford to do now. I'll now hand over to Mac, who's going to walk you through all the tools that we're proposing, as well as our proposed implementation strategy.
Thank you, Peter. So the first tool that we'll discuss today is time-limited parking. This tool is applied near popular destinations and applicable to all users. By encouraging some vehicles to park for a shorter duration, this tool increases the number of nearby parking opportunities that everyone can use. The sign on the right is an example of an existing time-limited parking restriction that we already have in Deep Cove, with 1 and 2 hour parking being common on Gallant Avenue. So from this map, we see time-limited parking is already in use in several streets for Deep Cove. This map also shows a small number of streets that would be good candidate for time-limited parking. When we consider their proximity to destinations and to the off-street parking lots in Panorama Park and Deep Cove Park parking lots. The sign on the right is an example of the proposed time-limited parking restriction for new streets in Deep Cove. You'll see that the sign is seasonal, which allows vehicles to park for more than 3 hours overnight and during the rainy season. The next tool that I want to discuss combines time-limited parking with resident exemptions and is aptly named time-limited resident exempt parking. And this tool only restricts parking opportunities for vehicles that do not have permits. Again, time restrictions are used to increase turnover and the number of parking opportunities that are available to everyone, but this time only by increasing turnover of visitor vehicles. Resident permit holders would still be able to park for 72 hours as is currently permitted by our street and traffic bylaw. The sign on the right illustrates what staff are proposing for the new time-limited resident exempt spaces in Deep Cove. It confirms that visitors would have to abide by a 3 hour time restriction during the busy season. For residents with permits, this tool would not apply. So this map shows streets that are good candidates for time-limited resident exempt parking. That's not to say that these streets would be exclusively time-limited resident exempt parking, as this tool can also work well in combination with the next tool that I'll discuss, resident parking only. A mixture of resident parking only spaces are also proposed on many of the same streets that you see here. So resident parking only, or RPO. We apply this tool on residential streets with limited parking supply near areas of high visitor demand. This tool can discourage circulation of non-resident vehicles on some residential streets. However, it can also greatly reduce the available parking capacity to manage visitor demand, including guests of residents. To balance these benefits and trade-offs, it's often applied in combination with other parking tools. Where installed, all RPO spaces are off limits from visitors and reserved exclusively for resident use. So again, this map shows blocks where we're currently considering RPO. Once again, a mix of time limited resident exempt parking is also proposed for many of these same streets. The sign on the right confirms that parking is not permitted in these areas except with a valid permit. This is an example of a seasonal RPO restriction, with the restriction being in place from March 1st to October 31st. Finally, there are long-term parking areas servicing parking needs greater than 4 hours. As Deep Cove has some long-term parking needs that cannot be accommodated off-street, such as parking for employees, opportunities to preserve unrestricted parking have been pursued where possible. Strategically placed long-term parking can also support our traffic management objectives by encouraging vehicles with long-term parking needs to park before entering a restricted parking zone. So now that we've reviewed the tools and their possible application, I will present our proposed strategy. There are 3 main components of our near-term strategy to improve on-street parking management in Deep Cove. First, expanding time-limited parking for everyone looking to park near destinations in the village. This will increase the number of parking opportunities in the most desirable locations, getting the best use of the limited parking that we have. Second, expanding our year-round RPO zones in areas where there's very limited parking supply and challenges associated with vehicle circulation and access. Restricting visitor parking on these constrained streets reinforces traffic circulation onto through roads when entering and exiting the village, and away from streets where visitors are unlikely to find parking. Finally, establishing 3 new seasonal time-limited RE and RPO zones to restrict parking opportunities for vehicles without permits. Here, visitors would only be able to park in designated locations for up to 3 hours during the busy season. Residents with permits would have access to both RPO and time-limited RE spaces year-round. Altogether, this plan would add roughly 50 new time-limited spaces near destinations. It would quadruple the current RPO from approximately 80 spaces to 340 spaces. And finally, these RPO spaces would be further supported by 270 new time-limited RE spaces. Altogether, RPO and RE would now account for the majority of parking tools in Deep Cove. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you very much. No, that's good for that. So just to be clear, though, the unrestricted, or you go past, even with the CD&D parking permit, it's the standard 72 hours maximum that we have throughout the district of North Vancouver.
That's correct. That was still applied.
It's not indefinite. No, I know we have to put everything on the table when we're considering parking issues in that area. There's no question that even this season already, we've had several days of really confusing situations with the number of people that are entering the Cove. It is way up over its historical numbers. And there's so few tools available to us to actually stop people before they get into the general neighborhood. And so then you have people who've come half an hour, 40 minutes to come to the Cove, and they're going to circle the neighborhood until they find something. And that may be out as far away as the 1300 block of Deep Cove Road and quite far out of the village. But it's I'm glad to see that we're using the RPO exempt tool that the council gave a couple of years ago. I think that can be a useful tool in that area. Yeah, I'm open to this. I do think we have to have there are a few key streets where I'd like to see what that mix would be on it, not just the general crayon over the whole neighborhood kind of thing, just because it's very key. The land has to function, the businesses need the proper amount of support and spaces, and moving ahead without us figuring that piece out with the number of businesses that are now absolutely reliant on delivery services and other teenagers in the area. It's important for us to get that right out of the gate. But I'm supportive generally of us moving more towards this. Councilor Muir, Mr. Joyce, you.
So I just want to drive on the point, Mac mentioned it, compared to when we came to council 10 years ago, when we did the study with the SFU, we tried to balance those users. As you heard Mac said, this is a real push into really prioritizing the residents of Cove. There's a quadrupling of the RPO zone, so it's a real push in the recognition that we're at overcapacity in that area.
Joyce, Councilor Miriam.
So as someone who's lived on Panorama Drive, Deep Cove Road, Badger, and worked for 15 years on Gallant, whose family ran a business for 75 years, just off Mount Seymour Parkway and Deep Cove Road, I'm intimately aware of the challenges and issues in Deep Cove. It's always been a balance, and the residents of the Cove and this community have always welcomed a balance of visitors and residents, always. But what has happened to Deep Cove since Instagram was invented and social media has been off the charts. And I feel like this is a gift from Mr. Joyce on the eve of his retirement, that we're finally talking about RPO in the whole area. When I look at this, residents, businesses, and visitors, I have to point out to staff and council that the balance is allowing the locals to go back and support the businesses like they have done for decades and decades. Restaurants that were going to disappear, the community came forward and said, no, we want to keep the restaurant here. We want to keep the savory. We don't want it to go away because it meant so much. So it's not either or. It is allowing those locals to be able to come back and support those businesses. There's many of us that just do not go to the Cove anymore in the summer because we're not going to be part of the gauntlet, which is the existence for people that live down there. You know, I grew up there and I can't live there because I can't put up with what the residents put up with it every single day. I talked to a resident yesterday. He emailed me and said he had an argument with somebody who wanted to park in his driveway at the bottom of Beasley Lane on Sunday. He was trimming trees and somebody was like, why won't you let me park in your driveway? And that's something that happens all the time. So don't think of it as we're not allowing people to come into the Cove. You're going to re-energize people that are already there to go down and support the businesses. I'm a bit disappointed in that the RPO is not a strict RPO in most of the streets that are outlined in your presentation. We're still trying to have it both ways, and we can't. You can look at Kitsilano, you can look at Horseshoe Bay, or I've been given those examples for years. They have strict RPO parking, they have commercial parking, and they have parking lots. And they do that because they don't want people driving through the neighborhood. You do not go to the West End and expect to park on the street, and you do not go to Horseshoe Bay and expect to be able to park on a residential street because you're not allowed because it's RPO. This plan with the 3-hour permit, except with CDNB permit, will continually allow people driving around, looking for a spot, and continuing that circulation without restricting it. And I am really disappointed that that's what we're considering. I think it should be the majority of streets in yellow should be RPO. We've got Cove Cliff, Panorama, Rock Cliff. We've got the gravel lot behind Cove Cliff Elementary School, and we've got the parking lot in front of the school. We've got Sea Cove. We've got the lot at the bottom of Rock Cliff. We've got Panorama parking lot. And once we return the circulation back to the way it used to be, it will be an area that's easy to access in and out. But to suggest that we're going to put RPO and then 3-hour time limited parking. And we all know what kind of enforcement levels we have in this municipality. They are non-existent. And you can take a risk and park in the district. You might get a ticket. You're gonna get a ticket in the city of North Vancouver, no question, you are gonna get a ticket if you are over that parking time limit. But in the district, you might be able to park there for a week and no one will notice. So I just don't understand why we don't want to see what happens if we put strict RPO in and direct people to 4 massive lots that take hundreds and hundreds of cars. Instead of perpetuating this continual circulation of people driving around the block, hoping to get the coveted 3-hour parking spot, because that's what's gonna happen. It's honestly not science. It is human behavior. And if people think they're going to find a spot, they're gonna try, because they've driven from Richmond. We're gonna drive around a few times. Let's drive one more time. We do that normally in a parking lot. Costco. I went around 4 times today trying to find a parking spot because I had driven from North Van to Burnaby. So the problem with this is that we're trying to create a balance of residential sustainability and living in peace and quiet in this community that we love, and also allow people to come down and visit, but not everybody on a Saturday at 2, not all at the same time. And I'm sorry, folks, you just don't keep, you're not allowed to continue to drive around over and over and over again, hoping to find a spot that you're never gonna find. That's what's creating the congestion, the lineups, the inability for people that live in the area that use businesses like the pharmacy. They can't get down to the Cove because there's a massive lineup. They can't actually get there. So I will support RPO, seasonal. I will support the commercial parking around the commercial center, the wayfinding to the lots, but I don't support 3-hour except with a permit, because you're just going to have the same thing happen that happens every single year.
Councillor Back, did I see your hand? Oh, so I've got Councillors Back and Councillor Ma. Mr. Joyce, you wanted to add a comment?
Just there was 652 tickets issued last year by law, and 286 of those were in the RPO zone.
From what time to what time?
You might have to dig into that, but those were the tickets issued, and they covered the RPO zone.
Even with the RPO, you're handing out 200 tickets in those areas.
That's because people are willing to take the risk to get a parking spot. And I would say the numbers of vehicles coming down there, 650 is a fraction of the volume that is actually coming into the area. And if you give straight RPO and say no parking on these streets, enforcement is there, you are going to get ticket after ticket. It's going to take a bit, but people will get used to it and they won't go into those neighborhoods anymore.
Councillors Back and Forbes. Councillor Back.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Councillors Back and Ma. Councillor Back, sorry.
I just wanted to start by thanking staff. I know that you've been working on this project for a long time, and you are trying to balance a number of competing interests, as you highlight here. People are going to continue to keep coming to Deep Cove. It's a world-class destination. People want to come for the businesses. They want to come for the hiking opportunities, and we're always going to be, having to look at different ways to manage that demand. But I do want to caution, if we get more and more restrictive without really adding any safe routes or other ways to get to the area, we're going to continue to have problems. And as you've highlighted in the presentation, we'll continue to move those problems out street by street. So I'm generally supportive of the approach that we're taking here. I would hope that in a year's time that we can take another look and just kind of see what the impact has been and how. I'd be interested to know how we're measuring our success, and maybe you can comment on that. But I think if we go too restrictive without offering alternatives to get to this area, we're only going to continue to have problems. So I think you're doing your best to kind of strike a balance here, and you've done, I think, a good job. I've got a couple specific questions, but I wanted to hear your response to that first.
Yeah, sure. So through the mayor, one of the things that we do like about the strategy is just signs and posts. And so as soon as we install it and we see how things are going out on site, it's fairly easy for us to modify things based on observations that are happening. We haven't seen something this big happen in Deep Cove. We have an idea of what it might be doing, but we're not going to know for certainty until it's actually implemented, should council endorse what we're proposing. And so in terms of coming back and monitoring our lights as well and reporting out to council, that's really reasonable statements to be made to us. And that's something that on every project, we monitor what happens out on site, but we know that there's a council interest on this as well. So we're happy to do some reporting.
Thank you. And so at that time, if we decide that we want to see more restrictions, we can do it then. But I think this is probably a good place to start. I had a specific question because I've heard, and I think you may have all heard from a couple of residents on Rayburn, and Rayburn is not included at all in terms of the restrictions. Do you comment on why that is?
Yeah, I can speak to Rayburn and I can maybe speak as well to Deep Cove Road. So in terms of like starting with the year-round RPO, it's getting into that traffic circulation piece. So we know just at the outside of those time limited restrictions, that if we have an opportunity to provide a slightly longer parking restriction, we're going to look for it. And the reason why we've looked for it on Deep Cove Road and on the north side of Rayburn Street comes down to uninterrupted frontage. So there is 26 spaces on the north side of Rayburn Street there that don't have resident driveways kind of impacting that access. And it's naturally quite close to where people are going to be looking for parking because they've just gone and looked for parking in the Deep Cove parking lot. Similarly for Deep Cove Road, as people are entering the village, as they get trained and learn and know that there is long-term parking on Deep Cove Road, things like employees can stop their vehicle there in the morning, get out and go in and work their job. So the idea is trying to accommodate it in places where there's like a large section of on-street parking. And as Peter said, monitoring and seeing if it works.
Thank you. And as part of this strategy, have we talked to, assuming we've talked to some of the businesses and just wondering what their feedback is in terms of the demand that they anticipate for employee parking?
So we did consult with businesses as part of the engagement that we did in late 2022. And really this plan looks at several of the business needs. So one, we aren't proposing any changes to Glant Avenue right now. There's 2 existing loading zones on there that are important to those businesses. As well, we talked to them about what their customer needs are in terms of the time limit. So it's the 10 to 8 restriction and the 3-hour restriction really gets into some of those different businesses that may need a little bit longer parking, as well as providing shorter term parking for the businesses on Glant because that functions for their needs. And we have heard that unfortunately, like with some of those businesses on Gallant, there really isn't space for them to accommodate employees who need to drive there. So this is really trying to service all those needs.
Thank you. Those are my initial comments.
Councillor Mall?
Thank you very much to the engineering team for the report. Some of the comments that my colleague, Councillor Murray, said, really resonates with me. And the opportunity, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, to meet with some of the residents. Walked down there, they showed me some of the challenges they have, especially on Rayburn Street. So I appreciate that. We see that we're trying to find a balance, but if you can go back to that circle, balance. Are we treating them all equally? When you say trying to find a balance, are you treating them equally, or is residents given a higher priority in your analysis?
Yeah, so through the mayor, historically, we've tried to balance all needs. What we're proposing right now is kind of Gavin's alluded to. We're doing a lot for the residents. While we're still thinking of businesses and visitors, as we were talking about before, we're quadrupling the RPO spaces. In terms of resident exempt and RPO zones, 3/4 of on-street parking will be one of those 2. So it really is starting to move that star a little bit away from the center. So we do recognize that as staff, but we understand that council and the community wants something to be done. And based on the feedback that we're hearing, this is kind of the direction what we think is an incremental step.
One of the points that I brought up before, after speaking with some of the businesses down there, is Matt, right?
Yeah.
I think you alluded to it, parking for staff, but where exactly is that going to be?
Yeah, so as you're entering Deep Cove on Deep Cove Road, on the main road there is currently parking available all the way up Deep Cove Road on the eastern side of the street here. So a lot of this would remain unrestricted parking. And as well Rayburn Street. I imagine that if I was coming early in the morning, my inclination would be to have a typical spot that I would use. So if I worked at a business on Glen, I'd probably lean more towards, if I see a spot on Deep Cove Road, I just pull over and get to my job.
Can I ask, was there any consideration to designating some areas for staff? One, and within the restricted areas, was there any thought to potentially giving that you figure out the system, but allocating some parking passes to the businesses so they can park in the restricted zones. Is there any thought to that, or is there, like, help me to understand what the negatives and positives of that might be?
So, yeah, so first of all, we don't really have right now as a tool in the district, on-street parking that is permanent for businesses. Like, that's not something that we have really developed. So it wasn't something we looked at in terms of providing an exception as part of this work. But I think that, you know, these are the types of things that we can look into if we hear from the businesses that what we're presenting or what we're installing isn't working for them. I do think, thinking about sort of regular shift work, hopefully they will get kind of the first opportunity to have some of that parking. But for someone who's coming in
Coming at
later in the
4
day,
o'clock.
that there might be some challenges.
That was exactly one recommendation that I got from a business. Can we have some some parking passes for staff? I'm not asking for like 10 or 20, just 2 that they can rotate among their staff. They just threw that out as a suggestion.
Yeah, so just through the mayor, that is not the district's typical practice across the district today. So if council was to indicate that this is kind of the direction you need to get us to go into, that is a brand new area we'd be going into.
Deep Cove's not typical though of the district, so.
Just following up, and I may be opening up a can of worms, and I just want to have this discussion, because there are some areas of the district where we do have paid parking. In conjunction with Metroman up at the Canyon and Line. Help me understand the reason behind not considering paid parking. Because to me, having been part of East Park downtown, paid parking helps to actually turnover. It like it forces you. And I'm just trying to understand why, because we got massive parking lots as
We have a
Councilor said,
pilot going.
but there's nothing to say I can't park there for 12 hours.
Yeah. So through the mayor, for the parking lots, council's already given us direction to go and implement, and we are engaging and procuring our service provider for those 2 parking lots, Panorama and Deep Cove. And so that is coming. So council has already given us that direction. Right now, when we do start negotiations with that preferred proponent, we also want to be talking about what is the potential for on-street parking considerations, because parking lots versus on-street, based on the discussion that we previously had at council, we wanted to segment those 2 discussions so that we could just talk about parking restrictions today. Nothing that we're doing is circumventing on-street paid parking in the future.
Because, you know, if you use the, pay by phone, you can set limits, but I can't renew after 4 hours, so we're expecting it's going to be.
Yeah, that is certainly a tool as we continue to grow as a district, not just in Deep Cove, but the district as a whole, and provincial housing legislation as well. There is going to be more demand on our on-street areas, and so that is an effective tool for us to consider.
And I don't know where we can find it, like, you know, we talk about maybe parking for staff, and you know, you said that's not the model right now. I'm just wondering, can there be parking for, if you're going to these businesses, you know, here's some parking for you. So we do something to make sure we support the businesses. I'm just wondering if we can segment it even that way, or is that something that would lead to a whole challenges?
Yeah, so our approach through this exercise here is to shorter duration to encourage that turnover to support more customers for businesses is focused in the core. So that's the approach that we've taken on here. We haven't necessarily gone to the degree of saying, this is for this business, or if you want to come to these businesses, here's where to go park. That is not how we've proposed it.
Because in theory, I could be down there, you know, paddleboarding for the whole day. And yes, these areas are for businesses, that's great. But if someone's there for a whole day, or, you know, family picnics, we used to go down there for family picnics. Not as much now, but, you know, you could be tying up parking for quite a bit.
Yeah, so in response to that, the intention of how we're proposing this implementation, the closer you are to the business core, the shorter duration. If you follow the rules, that will apply to you. Further out is where the longer term, if you're kayaking, staying for a full day, that's kind of the intention here. The closer you are, the shorter duration parking there is, the more restrictive it
So the
becomes.
consequence, I believe, that I'm going to hear from some of our residents is it's forcing the people looking for those longer term parking to come drive into their neighborhoods. That's the consequence.
There is There is staff parking on Gallant. A number of buildings have employee parking. On the Honey side, there's a huge parking lot in behind. Underneath Cove or Arms Reach, there's employee parking, but they share parking with the yacht club. Up above Panorama, they have some little parking pieces in there. And and on the other side of the road, there's parking too. So there's never enough. I mean, the one thing that should be brought up is the cultural center. You know, try to go see a play and find parking on a sunny evening when it doesn't get dark until 9. It's challenging.
So just on the 3-hour resident exempt piece, it seems to me that that window we're giving it too much free parking on it if we plan to have paid parking in the park spaces. If you're not starting enforcement till 10 a.m. and then they get 3 hours, that means you're not actually in a position to potentially ticket someone until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And if a person is joining the Cove in the evening, that means it's free unregulated parking starting at 5 o'clock at night, not 8 o'clock at night, because you get 3 hours and then you're beyond the time period. So it would seem to me that either you need to shorten the total available hours from 3 down to 2, or you need to start earlier and potentially go later, something, because like you're only going to have a 4-hour window of full enforcement on it. I get that someone could have started their time before that 4-hour window or finished their time after it, but it seems to me like with a 3-hour and a 10 a.m. start, you can't hand out a ticket till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And that seems to me like that's not going to be enough to manage the turnover of the spots. So why 10 instead of 8?
Start there. So in terms of some of the uses that we have here, the boating activity that goes on in Deep Cove, they have 3-hour rentals, but a 3-hour restriction is a challenge. And what we've heard from some of the people that do boating is, if I want to do a 3-hour rental and I have to park my car further away, I don't have time to park my car, get there, launch my boat, take my boat out of the water, and come back and move my car. So the idea behind starting it a little bit later in the morning is that 10 a.m. is when we start to see our peak usually. Like if we look at the sort of, not the busiest day in the Cove, but if we look at sort of our typical peak day, 10 a.m. is when things start to fill up. And so basically it's aligned with trying to give those people that are paddling a little bit more time to do some of those activities in the morning. But essentially, when we know that we're exceeding our 85% occupancy threshold, at that point, we have to draw the line and we can't go later than 10 a.m.
Those early morning paddle boaters are long gone by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So why do we have it queued that way to extend to all the way to 1 o'clock before we start doing enforcement? I mean, we have staff on that whole time and they won't be able to give out a ticket. So it seems like we need to adjust that window in order to be able to make it so that our commitment of staff time is worth it.
If council is wanting for us to explore kind of expanding that duration, changing that duration, that's an easy fix for us. This is just representing in terms of what the technical work's saying, but in terms of what's happening on site, if council decides to start earlier, finish later, whatever the case may be, that is certainly something that we can take and feedback and incorporate.
Sorry, can I just ask one follow-up question?
Got councilor back in line, but
Just, does your plan also call for additional resources for enforcement?
At present, this is just in relation to the parking restriction pieces. We do know enforcement through our planning division is something that's of a big concern. And so we can certainly, if should council endorse this, we can certainly take that away and discuss the enforcement.
Joyce?
Yeah, Your Worship, if council was to go down this route, certainly as part of this next year's operational budget with the expanded zones, we'd have to look at that. We've also increased every year the park rangers and we're deputizing them now so they can also deal with the parking issue.
How much is a ticket? Yes, you do. It's cheap. Just
No,
pay
it's
the
not.
It's not
ticket.
cheap, it's not cheap.
It's not cheap.
What is it? Have you gotten one before?
No, I think it's like I've had complaints about them before. I think it's $120 if you don't pay for it the first week or something like that.
It's not 120 bucks.
I think it's like 87 face value and 120 if you don't pay it the first week. I get the complaints. Councilor Back, I think you raised your hand.
Oh, it's 55. Somebody just texted me.
Have we worked with the schools? Is it the schools in the past about providing some parking there during the summer months? Will we still offer that overflow parking option that maybe could be used for employee parking?
Yes, that's correct. So we work with the school district every year. And so when school's out of session, for whatever space they have available close to Deep Cove, we enter into agreements with them to utilize typically in July and August. But because obviously when school's out, we're trying to get more and more of the year. Last year, we're trying to eat more and more into before and after school is out. So that is certainly a tool for us. It is not our property, so it's not necessarily something we can fully control, but year in, year out, the school district does work with us. But it's certainly one of the tools that we do try to utilize.
Okay, so that would still be part of the mix here.
Correct.
And is there any time restriction on or can we even put time restrictions on?
It's unrestricted. And in terms of applying, because they're a little bit less desirable, because they're a bit further away, that would probably be good to keep this unrestricted.
Councillor Miri and Councillor Folk.
Where is the 3 hour, like, as the mayor pointed out, we've sort of just got this yellow shading. There's not a lot of specifics. So where is sort of the details of that so the community can see what the details look like?
So in terms of each individual street, it's likely if it's in one of these yellow zones to have a mix of both on any given block. One of the things that we try to do to maximize parking available is we look at good candidates for our resident parking only, where there's several driveways near each other. The spaces are a little bit tight. If we can maximize our parking better by concentrating our resident parking only spaces in those locations, we can sometimes get more parking spaces out of the street. So that site by site piece has been done for all of these roads at a sort of desktop level. So we've gone in and we've mapped it out where we think there's a legal spot and what that would mean. Just in terms of the discussion today, we were trying not to have this be a discussion where we kind of went through this street by street, but that has been looked at. And what I can say is kind of generally these streets will have no more than 50% of their parking be resident parking only, except in a few cases where it just sort of made sense from where we could actually install a sign or where there was parking available. But it's generally kind of a mix of the two.
Like if you were to drive down there on a Saturday afternoon or any day in the summer and watch what happens at the top of Rockcliffe at Rayburn, there is literally on those little, like these are country roads, right? There's cars parked, like probably half of the cars are parked from an engineering standard illegally. They're too close to the driveways. Sometimes they're in the driveway. When you make that corner by Rockcliffe coming off Cliffmont and you're going down to Rayburn, that street right there, and there's a lane that goes behind Rockcliffe for people to access their properties. That whole area is blind. It's on a hill, and the cars are literally parked in a horseshoe. At the bottom of Rayburn, they do U-turns in the middle of the road to get back up the hill. Like it's the behavior of drivers wanting to kind of squeeze in wherever they can, which is as much a problem as the parking. So it sounds very structured on a desktop, but in reality, it is ongoing chaos on a regular basis.
There's one
in
thing.
the high season.
There's one thing I want to add with what you're saying. One of the things that the signage will help us do is clarify in some of those locations, especially near an intersection, when vehicles are parking too close. So as part of installing, say, a resident parking only restriction or a time-limited resident exempt restriction, we can indicate through the signage that to the left of this sign is not a legal parking space, to help remind some people that they're too close to a driveway or a fire hydrant as part of that installation.
Mr. Joyce.
Your workshop.
This is a long day.
This is a workshop, so what we're trying to get from council is an intent at this point or a way forward. If we get that, then there's a lot of work to be done on specific streets. We all know the Cove is small cul-de-sacs, fire hydrants, no gutters in a lot of areas, so it'll have to go street by street on that basis. But if we get the intent from the workshop, we go to full council, we'll provide maps or a little bit more in that.
When can this be implemented?
heard Mr. Cohen say if we get direction, we'll bring it back right away to council and we could, because it's signage and posts, we can start this summer on it.
I would just say one more thing there, Little. There is some anxiety with the number of passes. Upper Lynn has no limit on the number of RPO passes. It's sort of all over the map in the district. And you know, like Panorama has always existed with residents from the ARM, parking in Panorama. If there's no parking, there's no parking. But to limit passes to 2 per household, when you have 3 children that all drive a car and you want them all to come for Easter lunch, there's got to be some flexibility there, because again, if there's no parking, there's no parking, right? It's first come, first serve. So when there is ample parking, there should be no reason why people can't use more than 2 passes. Because ultimately they may be able to share between their neighbors. That's what we used to do in Upper Lynn Valley. I think we've become very restrictive on how we issue them. And I think we have to provide some flexibility and allow some logic to prevail on the perspective of the residents, that, you know, they can accommodate cars when there is space. You know, I would also, in regards to the cultural center, right now, they have just come up with their own system on their own, which is working with Parkgate, using a shuttle. And I would just implore staff to, you know, look at the big picture here, how everything is connected. We're talking about a spirit trail coming to Deep Cove. I have significant concerns about the straight, more flatter stretch between a destination like Kate's Park and Deep Cove. Honey, maybe we'll just park in the Cove, get on our bikes, ride to Kate's, or vice versa. And then we've got a whole parking issue down in Lower Sherwood Park. So we have to really look at the whole area as a whole and how it operates. And I think the residents are the ones that know how it operates the best. And the cultural center is, when we talk about employees parking, they have crews that come in and set up the stage for the productions. There's 2 theaters down there, Impressions and Deep Cove Stage, and it's a challenging time for them. We also have issues around loading and unloading for both of those crews and groups, and you know, it's something that we have to consider. But I just, I really worry that the circulation issue is going to continue on this because of that 3-hour, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. And I think that those should be used very sparingly in areas closer to the commercial and not at all further out. I think the other thing is on Cliffwood, for instance, there's multiple accesses to trails there, and 10 a.m. in the morning, Deep Cove Road is full at like 7. There's people hiking up Quarry Rock at 6 in the morning. They access Caledonia, Badger, Cliffwood, Cliffwood Lane, Panorama. So it's not 10. It's like Deep Cove Road is packed with cars at 7 a.m.
Thank you very much. I'm in this area constantly. I've got 2 kids that work in the Cove, and I get a pretty good sense of what the differences are, like at where the time of the morning it changes. Like you can go down at 8:30 in the morning, generally walk around, you'll probably get a parking spot right into the land. But then by, as you say, by 10 o'clock, it gets pretty locked up. I hope this is an opportunity to fix this one sign that just gnaws at me. And it's right by the knot connector there, area there. And it's no parking, and the time is, it says 0800-18:00, which is not even respecting any form of time period in there. So I'd love to see that one gone. Like I said, I do think that I for one, I've heard Councillor Muri's concerns on it, but I think that the RERPO, you know, having the exemption option in there is a positive. I just think you need to adjust the time frame on it. Councillor Pope.
Thank you very much for that report. I generally agree with most of the comments around this table. I'm supportive of more restricted parking, and I'm pleased to see that the quadrupling of resident parking only and addressing the needs of the residents in the area. However, I feel like at the end of the day, it's really not going to address any, it's not going to end the gong show that we have in Deep Cove, and that is only going to get worse. I know this wasn't really part of your mandate, but I would like to see us having some solutions put forward in terms of, you know, other parking, overflow parking outside of the Deep Cove area, you know, in the Maplewood Industrial Lands area. I'm just trying to access parking wherever we can find it on the new fire hall site, and perhaps shuttles on weekends. Now, I know people have said, well, we tried shuttles before, but I think it's time to try them again. I think that people are just going to keep going to Deep Cove no matter what, because it's such a great place to go. And having these parking restrictions really isn't going to stop anybody. So as Councillor Miria said, it's going to continue that circulating and that gong show. I'm glad to hear that park rangers will be doing more of the enforcement, and I think that will help there. And I agree with looking at on-street pay parking. I think that could also help as well. And in regards to the shuttle, I was also thinking that, you know, I used to take the shuttle over Christmas to take my daughter up skiing to go to Grouse Mountain. And that's because it became such a gong show up at the top of Grouse, and there was no parking. So they had to find alternate ways too, and further out. And people really were willing to park their cars a long ways away and get all their kids out and all their skis and all their gear and all of that up onto a shuttle and go up to the gondola. So I think it's worth exploring. Those are my comments.
See any further speakers at this
I
time?
have one more thing. We talk about signage, so we're going to be adding signs, but if you drive down to the Cove, it's an overkill of signage. There's so much signage you can't actually read it. There's so much signage because when you come down Gallant, you're at a 3-4-way intersection. Trying to figure out if you should go left to find one of those parking spots or right. There's flaggers, there's people crossing at 4 corners. The signs are overkill. There has to be a level of clarity in how we're directing people. And I did talk to on the family day long weekend when we tested the new circulation route into Panorama parking lot and realized it was a complete fail because there was a backup on Panorama and people couldn't get out of their driveways. I spoke to Mr. Joyce about putting into the budget regular flaggers on every single long weekend. And I would even go as far as saying in the summertime, once the area is full based on all of this enforcement that we're going to be doing and the deputization of our rangers, there should be an ability for them to communicate with radios to say we're full and direct people down Dollarton Highway away from the Cove. Because once you make that left off Mount Seymour Parkway on Deep Cove Road, you're in there and you got to turn around and get out. And that means you're going to drive the gauntlet to get out back along the Cove on Deep Cove Road. So you've got to stop the problem before it actually gets down there, because what's created is just a traffic jam, an absolute traffic jam. Because I know in engineering terms, this should all work, but sometimes it doesn't work, with all due respect to the
No,
engineers.
I think you heard Peter say earlier, I mean, you saw our toolbox of tools, we're almost at the end. We're discussing now who has priority for the available space at Deep Cove, recognizing from this point on, we'll always be over capacity.
Well, and so we have to have a really good discussion, council, with the community about how much capacity are we willing to take? How much volume are we willing to take? You know, other
At the same
communities.
time, though, it has to be a functional neighborhood. I still have to be able to pick up my kids from time to time.
You can.
Pick up some takeout and other things. And so you can't have, people have this idea that when you just close off the Cove, you can't have staff out there checking driver's licenses to confirm whether someone can be there or not.
It's not
viable.
well,
And-
currently,
and
Mayor.
so having a sign out, we have had the signs out on the parkway, warning, low parking, warning, you know, all of that. But if somebody's driven 40 minutes to get to the area, they're driving past the sign and they're gonna go look for parking. It's just unfortunately human nature in that situation. And so I'm totally, like I said, all tools on the table. I look for whatever staff wants to suggest about different ideas. I do think we need to consider it. But at the same time, some things are just impractical. Having a gate that closes off the Cove and we only let vetted people in and out, it's not
Well,
functional.
Mayor Little, I'm sorry, I didn't suggest that, but currently, as a member of the Metro Vancouver Parks Committee, we're experimenting with a real-time app in high-volume parking lots.
Park, not a town, and people need to be able to go to their houses, and people need to be able to go to the stores. We can't close it off like Belcarra closes off.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying that Metro Vancouver is experimenting with a real-time app in their lots that access parks. So we could look at that same kind of technology in our parks, parking lots, to say they are now full in these lots. You decide based on this app whether you're going to go down there or not, right? That's what I'm suggesting. Not shutting it off, just saying that we need to be able to control it in some way and not allow this running of the gauntlet constantly, which really will continue to happen with this proposal. But I'd rather start somewhere.
There's additional comments from Mr. Joyce.
Just both your points are well taken. We've thought about that. It isn't Belcarra Park. It's not Boundary Bay into Lawson. It isn't just a single destination. There's multiple people that use that route. But you're right in that I think the solution to this, looking ahead, is technology. It'll be somehow that something come up. We started that with our supplier, parking. We'll leverage that, whatever we decide, what app, whatever we start to look at paid parking and camera gates. We'll have discussions with that supplier about what technology is going. Because the best case is either there's a parking lot outside of the Cove, or you don't make that trip at all, but the Cove is full that day. Technology is where you'll get that information.
In the 1930s, there used to be something called a ferry that went to the Cove. Go figure, we live on the ocean. And they brought a boat down and would drop people off to go visit the area and then leave. It seems to me that we don't utilize our waterways as some other countries and cities in the world do as efficiently as they can. We don't do it as well. I think we should, there has been discussions about that over the years.
Fair, just before we get to Councilor back, and we are trying to expand the transit hours and frequency on weekends and during busy holiday seasons, and also adding some buses that have the capacity to carry more bikes in places where that's also frequently in demand. But transit is a great alternative, but it's very hard to get people who have made 90% of the trip in their car to get out and transload into a bus. It's just hard. You gotta manage human nature in that case. Councilor Back.
So, yeah, it's not gonna work for everybody, but the solution is gonna be in other forms of getting people to the Cove, be it transit or active transportation, safe cycling routes, which we currently don't have to Deep Cove. I wondered if you could comment though, with regards to bike parking in Deep Cove with the Gallant project. I know we got some new bike parking. Did that increase the number of spots? Or is it about the same? I don't know that offhand.
I don't know off the top of my head, unfortunately.
We'd have to get back to you. Councilor Back.
Better than the old ones,
Yeah.
but I don't know that there's more of
Better style, and they should all be the new staple style, but I think there's still a real shortage right in the village itself?
Yeah, I can at least respond anecdotally. We do still see now and again people chaining out to trees and stuff. So that's obviously a demonstration that the demand is there. The other piece that we have for the cycling element is that we now can accommodate, electric bikes charging through that as well. So the amenity is improving as well.
I know in the summertime, we've tried using the bike valet. Are we continuing to do that in the park? Do you know?
It didn't work, I don't think. It didn't work.
I don't recall seeing any sort of report on that.
Take it away.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Oh, did I see a hand from you? Okay. Okay, so where we're at here then, yeah, sure, Mr. Cohen.
Sorry, I was just going to summarize in terms, just because we're in a workshop, there's a lot of discussion there, and in terms of some of the key things that I was taking away from the discussion to inform a council report.
Just before we wrap up though fully, we do have a member of the public that did sign up ahead of time to speak to this item, and I think we have enough time to accommodate that. So Sonia here?
She's rejoining.
Oh, she's virtual, okay. That's not Sonia.
It could be.
Wow, Sonia.
She's in the webinar, so she just.
Okay, Sonia, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the workshop.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. I'm Sonia Suzak and I live on Cliffwood Lane. I've heard that this location has come up a couple times in the meeting tonight. I'm obviously speaking about the residential area, specifically Cliffwood Lane and Cliffwood Road. As it's been thrown around, the discussion is possibly implementing a 3-hour RPO, which unfortunately would not be useful for us because we're already in that state of cars cycling through our areas, trying to find parking. Yeah, the users of our streets is mainly the trail users. So they're sometimes within that 3 hour, they go for the hike and they come back. So they're already circling. So the 3 hour wouldn't be adequate enough for us. And also to that note, we have very limited parking. So we struggle just at the best of times to find parking. So when we add the busy time in the summer, it's next to nothing. So we're parking illegally. We're double parking in our streets. Neighbors have called in, cars have been ticketed. It's mayhem. So as a resident that lives here, it's unpleasant. So we would be requesting for 24/7 RPO for residents parking only on Cliffwood Lane and Cliffwood Road. Some quick points of concern. Number one is safety. Number one, I know a lot of families don't allow their kids out to play in the streets because the cars are zooming around. They're looking and not driving and not looking. So it's a safety concern. They're also using private property to turn around on, which is wear and tear on property, and also another safety issue for kids even on their own property. Yeah, and on that note of property, so that is creating wear and tear on people's driveways, personal property, which that's not we shouldn't be having to put up with that or pay for other people using our property to turn around on. There's noise pollution, as it was noted earlier. Our busy time can start at 6:30 in the morning or 7. So we hear people driving around, idling the cars, talking on the phone, getting their dogs out. It's nonstop, 6:30 all the way on until after dusk. It's difficult. And litter, there's litter, but that's not the top of our priority. Top would be safety and availability for homeowners specifically. Right now, we try to share with other neighbors to try and accommodate what little parking we have right now. It's not even the busy season. So I'll use a neighbor's driveway to park if there's nothing on our street. And that's what we're doing right now. And we really shouldn't have to do that. And it's very frustrating. So for someone that lives and breathes in Deep Cove, you just want a little bit of help. We've requested for permit parking. We had well over the percentage needed for that, and that's still not been implemented. It's going on 3 years now, so we're willing to pay for a permit just to have the peace and livability of where we live. So, yeah. So I just want to echo Lisa Murray's support, and I appreciate her support. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your comments, Sonia. Okay. Wrap up comments, Peter?
Yeah, so thanks council and members of the public for being here and providing inputs. You know, what I took away in terms of the 5 or 6 key themes of when we come back to council with a report for endorsement and things. So some concerns around duration, whether that be the 3-hour time limit or the start and finish of that time. That's kind of something that we'll take away from the team. Particularly an earlier start time sounds like there's some support for that. Concern that, you know, what is this doing for circulation? And the likes as well as what else are we doing in terms of whether it's active transportation, shuttles, technology, so we can provide some commentary on that as per part of the next report. Signage clutter we heard, so in terms of more that operational element, some discussion on that. More detail on what does this look like at a street level. So we'll provide that in the report in terms of, it sounds like we're generally in the right direction as a first step. We can provide more information on what does that look like at a street level. And then there's a lot of discussion in terms of parking lots versus on-street and the likes as well. So we'll provide some commentary on that. So that's what we took away from this one.
Can you also advise us as to when the circulation and panorama parking lot will be returned to what it used to be?
We can provide commentary on that.
Sorry?
I don't think we've committed to that.
No, we haven't committed to returning it to what it was yet.
No.
Why?
Well, because we'll need to investigate it and see it. We moved it to that location with respect to your worship because of the backup into the intersection. So it is part of congestion. Now we have congestion, as you pointed out, in the parking lot. Prior to that, we had congestion into the intersection.
Yeah, so there's going to be a point of conflict one way or another in that. Right now, the staff's recommendation is that the point of conflict is at the second entrance further along, that it doesn't back up into the intersection as frequently.
And just to also add,
but then you have to cross traffic.
right, just to also add, it actually created more parking spaces in that parking lot as well. That was also another driver for why we looked at the recirculation.
Except you had backup on Panorama Drive. There's a whole row of parking on the side of the parking lot, and you had congestion waiting to get into the parking lot, and people that were coming down Panorama couldn't actually pass.
So they're still looking at it. The question you asked was, when is that change happening? And I just wanted to clarify, they haven't committed to the change. They're still looking at the item.
I wish that in the future, though, when you're going to make decisions like that, like we got a lot of letters and phone calls from people. I certainly did. It would be nice to know that those changes are happening and maybe a discussion with the community instead of just unilaterally going in there and changing it. I just feel like if it's not broken, we shouldn't tamper with it because it's already such a sensitive area.
Okay. All right. To the next item.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I didn't realize that we had to make an appointment to say something here. I'm here representing some residents on Rayburn Street.
Okay, so yes, so the regulations for council workshop are signing up ahead of time, and then if we have extra time, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the second item, and whatever time we have left at the end, I'll come back to the group, but we're way over time. I have to keep moving along. And so anybody else who has feedback, they can send it in electronically to us as well. The decision's not being made here tonight. This is sort of directing staff generally, so we can still receive input on it before the decision is made. So I'm going to go through the 30-kilometer-an-hour update. And again, we have one speaker signed up ahead of time for that. And then if we have additional time, we'll open it up at that time for additional comments from the floor if there are. Moving on to 30 kilometers.
Perfect. So council, you're going to get a break from listening to me for a second. Wendell and Jordan, who's online, who'll be starting this presentation, and the Beneficial will be finishing it off.
Wendell, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Your Worship.
Floor is yours.
Okay, very good. Your Worship Council, today we are going to provide a halfway update to Council on the 30-kilometer-an-hour pilot through Edgemont Village. We do understand that both Council and the community are interested in some form of 30-kilometer-an-hour or lower speed limits beyond Edgemont Village. And we're going to take this opportunity to update you how staff currently approach lower speed limits throughout the district. Next slide, please. So On the map shown here are the current extents of the pilot itself, where we installed the one-year pilot. Council have also directed staff to consult with the Edgemont Village Business Association and the Upper Capilano Community Associations to perform monitoring and determine the impact on speeds, traffic volumes, and circulation patterns. Next slide, please. So this is a really busy slide. There's a lot happening here. It basically shows the pre and post implementation data. It's important to note that the first data was collected in the spring of 2023, shortly before implementation. Second set of data was collected in the fall of 2023. There's three key points that I would like to point out what this slide actually means. One of the things is, despite the works that we have installed in this area, we are not seeing significant evidence of changed driver behavior in and around Edgemont. So one of the things that means is staff as well as council were interested to see if this lowered speed limit would generate rat running into the surrounding streets. But what we're seeing in the data is that this rat running, as we call it, has not materialized. So both the volumes and the speeds in the surrounding areas have not materially changed. And then neither before nor after dropping the speed limits do we see very strong evidence of vehicle speeds exceeding 50 kilometers an hour in the village core. Next slide, please. On the community associations, we did receive feedback. The feedback was generally supportive. They generally expressed appreciation for the pilot project. But both associations also pointed out that they like it as a first step, but would like to see additional measures long term. The narrative that we're hearing from the community associations is generally consistent with the data and observations that staff have collected. Next slide, please. So what are our next steps? We will be collecting another round of data in the spring. And so that's particularly because we want to have comparable data from the same time of year so that we're not comparing apples to oranges, but we're actually comparing apples to apples. So we do have that additional data collection coming. This is also going to help us so that these are not just 2 data points, but we'll get an additional data point. Gives the data a little bit more credibility. Additional to the pilot, we have a current funding application with TransLink for funding a traffic signal in Edgemont and Highland. The installation of this signal is dependent on succeeding with the grant because it's not something that we are able to fund out of the current budget. And then additional to that, staff will continue to monitor the effectiveness of the measures, and we will obviously be doing additional data collection and effectiveness monitoring. So while today's focus on this really brief overview here is on Edgemont, I'm also going to ask Mrs. Ramani to update you on how we currently apply lower speed limits in other areas of the district. Over to you.
Thank you, Wendelin, your worship and council. As mentioned, we currently are in the process of reviewing our 30K zone across the entire district to investigate how effective the zones are and also to investigate how so far we've been determining the zones. On this map, as you can see, we've shown our schools, playgrounds, and also the adjacent collector and arterial roads. While we do have a procedure in place for reduced speed limits on local and collector roads, we do not currently have a consistent approach for implementation of reduced speed limits on our arterial roads. So what are the next steps in terms of the district and whole? So there are a few steps involved. The data collection and GIS mapping, that's where we are right now. Currently, we're in the process of collecting and compiling this based on data while leveraging our GIS technology. And this initiative will provide us with a comprehensive understanding of road infrastructure and serve as a foundation for the future decision making. And the step 2 will be validation of the existing 30K zones across the district. And we recognize the importance of consistency. As a result, we're undertaking a thorough assessment to validate and ensure uniformity for these designated areas. The next step would be the implementation, and the implementation strategy is structured to address specific areas of concern and prioritize safety of the road users. The first step of the implementation would be expansion of the 30K zones. In alignment with our commitment to safety, we plan to extend the application of these zones across areas such as schools and playgrounds. And we're encompassing both local and collector roads, and the district-wide approach aims to create safer environment for our pedestrian and in general our road users. The next step will be the consideration of the arterial roads. Right now, we do not have a wide consideration of the arterial roads when it comes to implementation of reduced speed limit. We do acknowledge, however, the need for further examination. We're conducting comprehensive research to understand the legal framework under the Motor Vehicle Act and to identify practical opportunities for implementing such designation across the district. And in conclusion, our roadmap for future projects reflect our dedication to foster safer and more consistent road condition across the district. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for the data. I mean, specifically, I remember I was pushing for monitoring Colwood because I didn't want to see Highlands Elementary School take additional traffic or higher speeds from that running. So I'm relieved to see that the data reflects that that has not occurred in that space from the 30-kilometer implementation. Also concerned though from the report that 30-kilometer implementation has actually resulted in people going dramatically slower through the village. And from talking to a couple of businesses, they still have lots of close calls in the village center proper where people are turning across traffic and not seeing a pedestrian in a crosswalk. And some of it, I have to say, is our own doing. We have some street trees mixed into the buildings and some other furniture that make it hard to pick out where the pedestrian is in some of those spaces. But I think that I'm glad to see that it hasn't resulted in Highlands Elementary taking the brunt of rat running and redirection. I have to admit, when I read the report, I really thought the focus was going to be on just Edgemont. And so this expansion to add other 30-kilometer-an-hour zones opens up a ton of questions for me. Specifically, we already have 30-kilometer-an-hour zones around our elementary schools and our playgrounds. And so do we think that our 30-kilometer sign, which has been shown in this to not be effective at lowering speeds, do we think that that's more effective than the school zone signs that we already use to have the 30 kilometers in those areas, or the playground signs that we already have in those areas? Is it your recommendation that in those areas we should be signing 30 kilometers an hour, 24 hours a day, rather than using the school and playground signs for those areas?
Yeah, so Mayor Little, so in terms of what we've been identifying is that like in many locations, we do sign it as 30Ks, and through the Motor Vehicle Act, that's applicable from dawn to dusk. That's what we're allowed to enforce. What we are recognizing is that there are some locations where we may not have the consistent signage that we have elsewhere. And so while technically we could enforce it, it's not really giving that message out to motorists saying, hey, there's a playground coming up particularly that you may want to be studying. So really what this exercise is doing is to really be applying the same approach across all these different areas, schools, and playgrounds, so that a consistent approach can be done. So it's more consistent for our drivers.
Okay, but I'm still having an issue with this. So when we use the provincial standard, which is the school sign, even if it doesn't say 30 kilometers an hour, it is 30 kilometers an hour from dusk till dawn during school while school is in session. And playground, it's dusk to dawn all year round. But if we put a 30-kilometer sign, doesn't that automatically move it up to the next standard and say, no, it's 24 hours a day, 30 kilometers?
Under the Motor Vehicle Act, we can't enforce outside of dusk. So it's similar to kind of, Edgemont Village. It says 30-kilometer hours, but in terms of enforcing it, there's some differences in terms of what the sign is saying and what you can enforce.
Is that all 30-kilometer-an-hour signs we cannot enforce dawn to dusk?
So we're allowed to install 30-kilometer-hour signs outside of schools and playgrounds only, and they can only be enforced from dawn to dusk. So the pilot in Adjournment Village is to identify that we would like vehicles to be slowing down, but from an enforcement perspective, it's a bit challenging.
Oh, I don't like that we would like people to go 30 kilometers an hour in that situation. Okay, I guess so. Then my next question would be, so did I understand you correctly that you're taking areas that have existing regulations such as the playground and park, and you're trying to standardize it? So you're not talking, you said expansion, but what you're saying is that the areas that already have some kind of 30-kilometer-an-hour, you're proposing to standardize.
Standardize, reinforce the message. Yep.
But as far as expanding the 30-kilometer-an-hour zones outside of playgrounds, schools, and the current Edgemont pilot, you don't have that in the works at this time. Okay, no, that clarifies for me. Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Murray, Councillor Forbes, Councillor Pope, and Councillor Back. Councillor Mon, do you have full circle here? Your hand. Councillor Murray.
Well, thank you for the information, but it's not what was asked for in the report that I brought forward to council that was passed unanimously. And I've got it right here that council directs staff to consult with the Edgemont Village Business Association, Edgemont and Upper Capilano Community Association to form a traffic analysis to address the impact of speed, volume, and circulation in Edgemont, much like the issues in Deep Cove, except they have more parking than you guys. We've just really basically looked at the speeds of 30K, but where and when did the discussions happen with the Business Association and the Upper Capilano Community Association on what we could do to slow down, to deal with the volume, to deal with the speed, which was informing the impact of speed, volume, and circulation in Edgemont Village. All we've determined is the speeds and rat running within the Edgemont course. So my question is, like, obviously, we're gonna have to be very explicit going forward with council motions, because this was about slowing people down in Edgemont Village and dealing with speed pedestrians. And it's now turned into a 30-kilometer discussion throughout the district. That's not what we asked for. So did we have discussions with Edgemont and the Upper Capilano Community Association? Because certainly the Business Association is very involved in seeing what's going on the boulevard and trying to deal with it.
Yeah, so through the mayor, just to identify a couple of pieces, we took the opportunity as staff to combine together both the Edgemont pilot that council gave us clear direction to be doing, and I'll talk to that in just a second, but also to identify what we're doing more broadly in terms of speed reductions. We recognize that combining them did not land well. So we recognize that that's kind of the piece there. In terms of the Edgemont pilot itself, that pilot is not finished. So we still need to collect data this spring. So as Wendelin said, we can do an apples to apples comparison. Staff did meet with the associations. I believe it was just before or just after the holidays to get kind of their initial feedback in terms of what are you identifying, what are you experiencing. The general feedback that I've received from staff is that while the associations are happy that there's been some type of step forward to be thinking about speeding here in Boulevard, they are providing feedback similar to what our data is saying like it's not really seeing a large reduction.
Okay, so my question, thank you. So sorry, but I know what you're gonna, I know what the end is gonna be. So my question is, how are we going to reduce the speed in Edgemont Village? I'm sorry, I'm becoming so frustrated with simple solutions that turn into projects that we don't ask for. And we're avoiding dealing with the issue at hand, which is people speed through Edgemont. Where are the raised crosswalks? Where are the bulges? Where are the ways to slow people down so it's safer? Where are the solutions in Deep Cove to reduce the amount of volume? Like, why do we turn these things into make work projects that don't ever result in helping the local communities? I'm so frustrated.
Councillor, in the presentation, there were several proposals there. I've got Mr. Joyce, Mr. Cohen. I think I saw Wendellin's hand there as well.
Yeah, your worship, the way we work as engineers, first thing we just identify the problem. So that's what we've done. We've done a statistical analysis to see what the speeds are. And it's no surprise to me that the speeds before and after on the 30K are after posting signs are similar. I would have known that. And that's what all the data shows. That's what all the research shows. That's what all the case. The next step, and you heard me talk about this last year, if you think about traffic calming and how we work, there's statistical work analysis, which you just heard. And the next step is public and perception and involvement of what that would look like. That's when you move into your tables and your speeds. And council is going to have to look at that in the context of all the other areas, Kirkstone, Mountain Highway, all the other streets and priorities that you have. You give staff direction to go, well, here's the information at 28 or 30 or 32, but you still want to enter into a traffic calming with, say, speed tables in the middle of the intersection. That's the direction we would take and move on that. That's where you move from the engineering analysis into the public involvement, the public realm of what you want your community to look like.
I think it does feel, after being here for 29 years, that it sounds easy when you say it like that, but it doesn't result in very often in solving the problem. It feels like we just sort of massage it and things stay the same. So to me, the speed in Edgemont has increased because of the number of new developments in the area. I do feel like there is a direct relation in the vehicles that are being driven and the ride that those vehicles create. You do not feel like you're driving 80 in some luxury cars. I think it's simple to slow cars down in areas, and we've done it for years. You put speed tables in, raised crosswalks, etc. Bulges.
So that's what I'm saying. That may not be backed up with statistical speeds or traffic analysis or accidents at this point, but there might be a clear perception from the businesses and the community that there is a problem there that we should address.
And to be fair, I'm sorry, I just got to say one more thing there. I know, but I'm sorry, this was my motion and I don't feel like the motion was addressed by staff. So I would just say that the Business Community Association and the Edgemont Upper Capilano Community Association are the ones that brought this problem forward to council, and council brought it to our table and we voted on it unanimously to go forward. And now I feel like we're right back where we started.
Maybe somebody from staff can comment on what we heard back from Business Association when we presented this data. And we'll move to the next point.
Yeah, so Wendell, and I'm going to pass over to you with any initial feedback that you've heard from Business Association.
No. Yeah, that's right. So we did talk to the Business Association and to the Upper Capilano Association at least on 2 occasions on the staff level. So one was to get initial ideas and feedback from the community associations, and then one was before the holidays to get their feedback on effectiveness, which again, the associations were generally appreciative. They also said they see this as a first step. For us, there is additional steps that can be taken and that we will likely analyze and figure out what we will be doing. If we introduce all steps at the same time, we won't necessarily know which one has the biggest impact. And so it is really important for us. We have gone to the first step, we have collected the data, and now we will go to the next step and we will assess again. This doesn't stop here, and we are actively talking to the community associations to address the issue.
So the order I have Councillor Pope back, and then I've got Forbes and that's actually the order.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is the analysis that's been done so far, which is 2 reports and assessments, not seeing significant evidence of change, no rat running in surrounding areas, volumes and speeds haven't changed, strong evidence of vehicles exceeding 50-kilometer limits, and we want to do more study.
Yeah.
Like, this makes no sense to me. Let's just end the study and get on with solutions. We know that that's not working. We know, not just in Adjournment, but everywhere, regions across the world, actually, that putting up signs to say 30 kilometers doesn't work. So I'm curious if we can shift gears here and move into the realm of solutions. I know that you have a toolbox full of them. Let's hear them. Like, what about traffic calming measures of other types, raised crosswalks, curb extensions, or even parklets like we see on the bus down there, reduce the traffic. So I'm also wondering if any of the other input that we've received, and we've received quite a few emails on this that are from the community associations or the business associations, is that factored into your assessments here? And because it seemed to me a lot of those people have a lot of good ideas, but they have nothing to do with the community associations.
Yeah, so through the mayor, in terms of answering, our intention was to finish the 12-month pilot. If council wants to provide us with direction to hold looking at that further and to go straight to solutions, staff can take that as direction. Our intention was to complete the 12 months per council's direction. Council's willing to change it if they want to.
Which would take us to what date?
I believe the first step was April, May, so shortly thereafter. So we're only like a couple of months out.
Okay, so you're talking about us completing the 1-year study takes us to May.
Yep.
So we're there anyway.
Pretty much. But I think you are hearing some impatience around the room, you know, that we want to get going. We all recognize that there's both anecdotal and reported accidents in the area, and we need to respond. Mr. Cove.
Yeah, one thing I really want to add, and it was happening parallel with this pilot, and Wendelin spoke to it. You know, we do have that application in think for potentially signalizing Highland and Edgemont. Through that process, if we are successful with that funding, that creates some opportunities to look at additional physical measures that can be done through the village. We think that should transit come to the table, and we hope they're going to come to the table very soon, so we actually have an idea of whether that's moving forward or not. That then starts to create that solutioning that council's wanting to see. Just right now, we just have no funding in our budget to be able to really look at it. We need to rely on partners, and we think this is actually a good opportunity, hopefully in 2024.
And what about the input as well? Because I know you get all the emails that we get that go to mayor and council. Are those used in consideration of your assessments?
In short, yes. Yeah, we do take on-site observations, whether it's from residents, whether it's from businesses, to inform kind of, you know, where does the next steps potentially look like. They're all kind of mimicking kind of what the discussion's been this evening, saying like, look, we're not really seeing a massive change. Have we considered traffic calming? So it all is in a line.
Councillor. Next, I have councillors back, Forbes and Mott. Councillor back.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with all the comments that have been made. I think we should complete the pilot, but I don't think 4 30K signs on their own, we should expect to see any significant result or slowing of traffic speeds from that. I think there's engineering solutions that we have to look at. And I know in speaking with residents, some of whom live in the area, but others in other parts of the community, they know that as well. And I think it is, I support looking at other measures that we can take, and crosswalks and signals and engineering solutions are what changes people's behavior, not 30K on its own. That being said, I'm glad to see that we are looking to expand or at least standardize 30K across the district, because I think it's an important tool. And it's very inconsistent right now. So especially around parks, as an example, around some parks it is 30K, some parks it's not. And those are definitely zones where it should be 30K, in my opinion, across the whole district. But in terms of Edgemont, I'm totally in agreement. Let's wrap up the pilot and let's see what other options can be taken and budget accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you. Just in regard to what we asked for and what we got, no disrespect to staff, Megan's communication. But what I was expecting, what I thought we'd asked for, because we've got so many developments that have already happened on the east side of Edgemont, and on Ridgewood. And now we've developed more going on the west side, and now we're putting in the cul-de-sac, we've okayed another development to go in. If we were concerned about the total traffic flow around Edgemont, not just Edgemont between a couple of blocks, between Queens and Ridgewood. So the total flow that we were looking at, this isolation of looking at, kind of 2, 3, or 4 short blocks, doesn't do us, does no service to us really. And I hate to say this, but Edgemont in itself is a rat run. If somebody wants to go from Capilano to the Delbert Rec Center, where do they go? They come down Capilano, or they come down Highland, and they may cut through, not Highland. Anyway, they come down and go through Edgemont Village. If somebody lives on Lonsdale or Lynn Valley, and they want to get over to Capilano Road and go up to Grouse or go to the suspension bridge, they come up Queens, they go through Edgemont, they go down Ridge. So in and of itself, that short area is a rat run for other people, for other reasons. The volume and speed, I sometimes wonder if it's people who are either they're visitors that have come to the canyon and Grouse Woods or other reasons, because I've lived all my life on the North Shore, and I lived on Ridgewood at one point. And I myself, when I get into the village, because there's parking, cars backing out, there's pedestrian traffic, there's no lights, there's multiple roads that enter onto Edgemont, I end up going about 15 or 20. I don't ever go there. So the people who know that area, I think, do slow down. The people who don't think it's a regular road and off they go. So it's my suspicion that I think part of that is that, and I wonder if we need to pre-warn on Ridgewood, 30K coming up on Edgemont, something like that, if we're not going to do it on Ridgewood. The other thing about what we asked for and what we got is, I was never asking for a district-wide 30K. I mean, I agree with 30K where it's appropriate.
I don't think staff have proposed a district-wide 30K. They're just talking about standardizing the existing 30K zones with a district-wide standard. It's not taking the local area roads and going 30 kilometers or anything like that.
Well, I'm happy to hear that if that's the case.
It does say district-wide 30K on the slide.
Standardization of the 30K.
Just that it wasn't what we asked for.
Right. It needs to be clarified better, I guess. Anyway, because I took that as if we're going for district-wide. And I'm probably going to sound like a bit of a, I am going to sound like a broken record here. Kirkstone Park never had 30K on there for years. I lobbied for it for years, never got it. And then suddenly someone else picked up the lobbying, thank goodness, Kelly Bond. And we got a 30K sign in there. But what the problem, so there isn't consistency with playgrounds and school areas, I would say it's more consistent, but playgrounds are not consistent with even having a 30K up anywhere. And there's no ending sign. So people come from Kirkstone or Mountain Highway and they see where it starts. They don't know where it ends. So if they're coming from Mountain Highway to Lynn Valley Road, they just get past, not quite past the park, they're still at the cross sports. And they think, oh, I can speed now. Well, there's an intersection right there. It's right on a curve, and they start speeding because they don't know where the 30K ends. So my recommendation is if we're going to put in 30Ks, we put in. And in 2009, there was a survey done by the district of all such as four-ways, crosswalks, lighting, intersection lighting, pedestrian activated intersections, which I think would be a good idea. Pedestrian activated intersection lights, that would slow them down more than just a sign. They'd actually see a light and then look for them. So I would recommend that. But all of those engineering solutions that were recommended to the district in 2009 were never implemented until people started complaining and walking for years and years and years. So I think our staff needs to be more consistent about if they're gonna say that we have traffic calming and put it in. And I also agree that I don't think we want this going on for years and more studying and more data. I think we already know what these issues are, but they're not for a long time. I think we just need to pick up our roots and move forward.
Thank you very much. Councilor.
Thank you. At this point, I support that the staff continue finish off the data collection. It's only a couple months. You know, we'll have a little more fulsome analysis. I'm listening to my colleagues around the table, and I hear what they're saying, but I'm not necessarily opposed that staff are looking at standardization of the 30K zones around the district. It's not 30K the way I'm interpreting. It's not 30K everywhere, but just the zones, because a few counselors, Councillor Back and I have met with different PACs and parents around schools, and there is a concern about speeds because they're not consistent. There's some schools off of major streets and cars are going really fast. So I'm supportive of the staff coming back with some comments on that. And I do have one question in terms of this signal application. Is the business association support about that? Because I have talked to some businesses around there. You know, we talked about roundabouts and stuff like that. Their main thing is just slow down traffic. They don't necessarily want all these different engineered solutions. So that's my friend.
No, that's all good. Through the mayor. So in terms of the response, it's actually from an engineering perspective, it warrants a signal. So yeah, across the district, we look at vehicle volumes and pedestrian volumes, and it's no surprise, there's a lot of pedestrian movements at Edgemont. And so just from the numbers, the sheer volume of pedestrians alone with the vehicles going through, it automatically just identifies itself needing to be signalized from a safety perspective.
Is a signal the only option though? I'm just looking at signals and it's, I'm just wondering if there's other options besides signals at that point.
From my perspective, and it aligns with some of the commentary that council's provided today, I would personally believe that a signal potentially with some other physical means, such as speed tables, we can explore in terms of a combo approach. All comes down to cost. That's the other consideration as well. So we want to see where we're coming out with TransLink and our grant application, and then exploring some of these other options. Where does that land us with? So it could be all at once. It could be a phased approach. We're just going to see what the numbers are.
And that signal would be pedestrian control. It's not this time, or
it would be a standard signal. So not full signal. So that would not be the flashing green. That would be, you'd get a red, green will be your standard signal.
Even if no one crossing the street, it's going to be red, as opposed to pedestrian control.
Sorry, I'm just going to refer to Pam. Would it be ped activate?
It would be a full signal. It would probably rest on Edgemont as the green primary.
Yeah.
And then pedestrians or traffic will approach on the secondary route. So it would trigger it.
Can you put a loop in pavers?
It likely have camera detection for that intersection.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Councilor Mao, your comments are complete. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. I have no speakers at this moment, so I do have a member of the public that signed up to speak to the meeting. So Barslow, who I saw in there. Hi. Welcome. You've got 3 minutes to comment to the workshop.
First of all, members of council, I would first like to thank the transport section of the district staff for your work on the Delbrook public meeting. It was a meeting whereby there was consensus and people respected one another, and the outcome, I thought, was, from my perspective, was really positive. The data revealing speeds in Edgemont over a year is really very disappointing. It seems that many people driving live in a world of self-entitlement. I suppose you as a council, you could throw up your hands and say that traffic speeds cannot be controlled. You could say that we live in a car culture where speed is an essential element. You could say that people do not change. I would remind you that in the old days, we didn't wear seatbelts in cars. We drank and then we drove home.
Mhm.
We didn't wear helmets on motorcycles and we didn't wear helmets on bikes. Remember too, that many of us used to smoke. These changes were made by social influences and enforcement. May I suggest that what is needed is physical engineering to bring vehicle speeds down in Edgemont. The engineers are the experts. Sometimes I disagree with you, but I think you are the experts. Putting in a sign or signs will have little effect. Try enforcement and try speed reader boards, but the key lies with the district staff. The key is engineering. I would also like to thank you for the consideration of a consistent 30K policy regarding parks and roads, because on Dilbrook it's 50 and in other areas, the same kind of road classification, it's 30. So it would be nice to bring everything back to a consistent standard. So thank you for your consideration.
And so we have a little bit more time. Sorry.
Do you have the previous Deep Cove?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. So just saying that I'll open it up. We've got about 10 more minutes if a couple people want to speak. So I've got 2 speakers. I'm just going to go with the gentleman first here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm here representing some us residents on that 4,500 block of Redmond Street there. And we have a bit of a concern. I personally felt like sort of the ugly duckling when I looked at the drawing there and found that Rayburn Street was blank. Nothing was going to happen. One little block of the whole area from Deep Cove Core out to Strathcona, basically. Now, we've heard staff say that the reason no attention was given to that particular block was because there's not many houses on there. And so parking is not an issue for the residents. But unfortunately, parking is not our issue, it's traffic. As it is today, and last summer, for example, which was a bit of a lead up to the resident-only parking restrictions that have come in place, there were signs, temporary sawhorse type signs put in at basically all those same streets that will now end up with resident-only parking that said local traffic only. So what that does to the traffic flow relative to Rayburn Street is, if you can picture in your mind, I wish we had the map up there of that plan, but I think I can explain it. When traffic comes down Deep Cove Road, they come into Gallant, they arrive at the intersection of Panorama and Gallant. By 9 o'clock in the morning on busy summer days, there's a traffic control person there saying you can't go down Panorama. Parking lots are full. They got one place they can go. They can turn right. They can't go down Gallant. It's one way now, the other way. They go down Panorama to Naughton. Can't turn right there. Turn left. All those little streets in there have resident local parking only signs. So they're forced to go up Rockcliffe. And they arrive at that intersection that Councillor Murray was referring to at Rockcliffe and Rayburn. Kind of a blind intersection, but oh, good. Parking down Rayburn, there's no restriction, no board, no signs, no restrictions. Still won't be, because it's not going to get resident-only parking or any other restrictions. To make matters worse, last summer, there was a great big sign up on the power pole there. Overflow parking down Rayburn Street. Now, it was directing traffic to the Old Cliff School parking lot, but that was full by 9 o'clock. So people drive in there, might as well go down Rayburn and see if there's any parking. Now, when did they go down Rayburn Street? Rayburn Street is a dead end street. It's also a feeder street for Parkside Lane, Lockhaven, a little bit of Cliffmont around the back, which is a dead end street, and East Ridge up the hill. So it's a feeder street. All that traffic, the local traffic, has to go out. So these cars come down Rayburn Street, they're heading east, but lo and behold, every parking spot was taken up by 9. But the parking spots, if there is one, they face west. So panic, space there, gotta turn around. There's a driveway. My wife had to bang the back of her trunk when she was out doing a bit of gardening in our driveway as the car drove in, another lady down the road on Cliffmont drove over the cone we had in the driveway that we started to put out after that. One vehicle did a U-turn right in front of our house, backed into the ditch, dug out the big couple of big holes. District staff had to come out and fill that in, and had a little bit on our lawn that got damaged. My neighbor on the right-hand side, who you heard from, some correspondence here, had a car that turned around her drive, ended up in the ditch on quite a slant. Had to get a tow truck to get that out of there. There are no sidewalks, there are ditches. There's an embankment alongside Cove Cliff School. My wife and I, a few times last summer, had to leave the road to scramble down to let the two-way traffic go because they can't really pass. And so the cars come down the hill, there's no parking there. They turn around in people's driveways, drive back out. I'll see the same vehicle 3-4 times within a 2-3 hour period. Same vehicle came down, back out again. And
Trying to find
it's very difficult, and it's going to be worse because every street in Deep Cove now will have resident-only parking, except that one little block on Rayburn Street. Now, as far as number of houses that use Rayburn Street in the area for parking, residents on Parkside Lane, which is a very restricted parking street, they use it as a resident-only parking sometimes. So they're going to they have parking taken.
Described the problem very well, but I need to get your name for the record.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Al Floyd, Floyd, 2567 Rayburn Street.
Thank you very much.
And I think a few other people have, I'm actually representing, I spoke to most of the, I think 11 houses that live on Rayburn Street, and they support the decision.
Can we look at that when it comes back?
Thank you.
I just wanted to, this business of Deep Cove parking, I need to tell you that several times last year, I live on Deep Cove Road, several times last year, and it wasn't always in the summertime. It took me 15 minutes to get from Mount Timor Parkway to my house. And I only live right across the street from my little school, so it's like a 3-minute drive, but it took me 15 minutes because of the lineup. So I totally agree with what Lisa said, Lisa Murray said, about the idea that if you just do this RPO thing, it's not going to do anything about that circulating at all. The only solution that I've heard tonight that sounds like it might have a chance of working is direct everybody to existing parking lots. Don't tell them they can park anywhere on the streets. If you're going to put in signposted parking on the streets, make it 30 minutes so that they don't stay there. Because if they think that they can find a 3-hour spot, they will circle and circle and circle. Thank you.
No long-term parking past this point and direct people to the
Or
parking.
the time limited parking that's being suggested as part of the RPO. That's the problem. It's just gonna continue the circulation.
All right, we've had a lot of good feedback tonight. I hope staff feel like they've got some lots to chew on here. We've completed the business of this evening's workshop. I'll accept adjournment. Thank you. Council, I don't have anything scheduled for you in this next week, so enjoy spring break. If you get a break with your kids, great. Otherwise, we'll catch up with you a week later than that.